And it's not in your back, in your pocket? Okay. Let's do it. Here we go. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What's up, everyone? Welcome to Simulation. We are featuring John Balbach today. What's up?
Fantastic. Thrilled to be here. It's good to see you, Alan.
Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate it. We are going to be unpacking some crucial conversation. I'm excited for it. You've got a cool background, and you're really focused on something that I think is crucial for society to really button into, get ready for, and bring that impact to the world. So let's jump into it. So, like, what led you into this this decision to want to bring more impact and decentralization and care for the population, people, through sustainability and through impact, and how did you become who you are?
There's a lot of questions in there, Alan. So let me start off by saying I'm more excited now about the prospects for humanity and the time that we live in. This is one of the most exciting times that I've experienced in a long time, if not ever, in my lifetime. And if you'd asked me 5 years ago, you would have gotten a very different answer from me. I had reached a point of depression and that the human species was really heading off a cliff, and we didn't have the tools to save what could be taking the planet down a course of no return for either our survivability as a species, if not taking a number of the other species along with us in a failed experiment.
And I think we need to pause there, because let's stay with that feeling for a little bit. We don't talk about that feeling enough on the show. What was going on for you that you were observing the world around you and feeling what was going on, and you just felt very pessimistic? Talk to us about that.
Well, thank you for raising it that way. Let's use climate change as a lens to kind of get into this question, and it's something that I've been working on for 30 years or so, and we can talk about more because it ties back to this question about what's optimistic today and what's driving me. And climate is a significant theme. The numbers that I was looking at, population of the human species, the rate at which our society and our economies were emitting the heat trapping gases, the speed at which we as a society or group of societies were or were not accepting what was happening and making changes to our emission of those gases. If you just started to linearly plot out those lines, it really looked like there was no other possibility except we would have a world that would be at least 3, if not 4 degrees Celsius warmer. And when we look at what that would look like in terms of a livable planet, it's a planet that very few of us would actually survive in. Right? We'd have to almost create bubbles and live within bubbles. And I have children. They would be their generation would begin to really experience that world, and that's something that I've been trying to avoid. And there's millions of me out there, fighting this fight that have a sense, but that pessimism was driven by a linear sense of how things would move. And
what I'm hearing is it's especially important to leave the world in a place that's better than when we were birthed into it. Not in a place where the children have to work much harder to fix the problems that we left them.
I used to have a bar that said leave it better, but the bar lately has been just make it livable. Right? We're at the question now, our generation. And every generation faces a major task. In World War II, the generations faced the major task of keeping together the societies which were based upon democracy versus totalitarianism. And our generation, we have a great task of, can we actually leave a livable planet? Not one that's better. At this point, the question is it livable?
Yep.
Right? And
it's crazy that that's even the question.
so to me, it's a challenge, but when you didn't feel you had tools, and I'd spent 25 years using the tools of government and policy and regulation, and then nonprofits and activism, then moved into technology, and moved into capitalism and moving finance.
What were some of those tools initially that you were using for those first 25 years of?
So my journey started in the 1980s, and I was in the U.S. Senate as an aide, a young aide, and
I've also been a page.
So you know the game a little bit, right? You know the
not in D.C., but I was in the legislature in South Dakota. It was fun.
Oh, fantastic!
It was fun being a page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very heady to feel as if you're a part of the creation of history.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It almost inevitably gets at your ego, and you gotta figure out.
It absolutely gets at your ego.
You gotta figure out how to quell it. But politicians are meditating and taking psychedelics and practicing the oneness.
There are few.
There's some.
There are a few
really
that I think would be
ones.
enlightened politicians, right? But they're a rare breed.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is back in the 80s, and so the Cold War was in full swing. Gorbachev wasn't quite yet coming to power, so we didn't have a tempering of the tension between really there was a fight about whose system of governing humans was better. Was it free market and democracy, which we were standing for, or was it socialism or some form of communism, which the Soviet structure was proposing?
Yep.
And I became involved in a really interesting way. I was an intern. I started as an intern. And I started to work for a senator from New Hampshire who took it upon himself to really go after the Soviet Union and make life difficult for them, because he was a hawk. And so at the time, a hard right Republican. I would work with folks like Jesse Helms and Orrin Hatch and the more hawkish side to make Soviet expansion more painful for Moscow and more expensive. I happen to be a rock climber.
I really want to ask how you helped make it more painful for
so I'm getting there. So I used to be a rock climber, and the senator heard through the staff that I knew how to mountaineer and climb rocks, and so he invited me up into his little office. Senators have big offices where it's more formal and you meet the constituents and you have meetings, but they have private offices that are in the Capitol Dome, where you would have your more discrete meetings, right? And he was a junior senator, so his was higher up. The more power you have, the closer you are to the floor, and the not. So he had an office that was actually in the dome, so it had a curved roof, and you could get 3 or 4 people in there, and it had a desk and a couple couches and stuff. So getting called to a room like that, when I think I was 19 or something, it was a little intimidating, and I was alone, and I didn't quite know what was going to happen. So I was excited but a little nervous. And he lays a map out on the table, and it didn't have any markings. It was just a topo map. And he said, "Could you get me over this?" And it turned out that it was a map of the Afghanistan-Pakistan area.
Oh, wow.
And it was the mountain range that ran from between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I looked at it, and they're from a mountaineering standpoint, they're difficult, but they're not like Everest, or they're not. It's not. It's more intense hiking with a little bit, right? And I was like, sure, absolutely. That's how I became involved with what became a good 10-year run of which eventually became the staff director of the Congressional Task Force on Afghanistan, moving billions in weapons that started in Afghanistan, then Angola, then Nicaragua. And basically we set out a strategy that was called the Bleeders. If we could take down, it was a strategy to shorten and perhaps end the Cold War much quicker. If we could take down the economic equivalent of 1 MiG a week. A MiG, which was a Soviet fighter, which is like an F-16. If we could take down the equivalent of a Soviet equivalent of an F-16, or what would be about the same cost
prevent the movement of weapons and aircraft and
no,
things like that.
just take
down,
like destroy
like a
them,
missile, or
like destroy them.
like a missile.
Yeah, if we could destroy a MiG a week, then the Soviet military-industrial complex would cease to be able to provide weapons and food to the Soviet Union, and they would start to collapse.
Okay, so you were analyzing the topographical nature of geography and then saying, how do we prevent the proliferation of weaponry to places that are promoting socialism, communism, but also trying to take down planes?
No. We took the other route. It was let's arm every place where the Soviet Union was outside of its borders. We would arm a resistance with as many weapons as we could put it in their hands to destroy their military complex.
Right where they're trying to expand,
Correct.
We're arming the insurgencies
Correct.
against their expansion.
Correct.
And then trying to take down those MiGs.
Correct. So that was
That was the 80s.
That was the 80s. So Afghanistan was the start, and then Angola was the second, and then Nicaragua with the Contras. Those were our three main battlegrounds.
Wow.
And we moved a lot of weapons, and it was somewhat successful.
Jeez. And it's so crazy.
And
how do you identify people that actually want to be a part of the insurgency? How do you build an alliance? That is so difficult to figure out how to do.
Well, yes, it is difficult to figure out who you can trust and who you can't trust. It turns out that in there's the unintended consequences of the decisions that you make. You don't really know until later. It turns out the training camps that we built in the Pakistan border trained Osama bin Laden.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
Because at the time, given what we were attempting to do, the lens and the decision-making lens at the time was arm and train those who could go in and inflict damage upon the Soviet Union and Soviet forces. What they do 10 years down the line, 5 years down the line, we would think about it, but you're just moving on the fly. You're making decisions that are based upon the intent then. You're trying to put in structures that would mitigate the long-term damage, but that's very hard to do. The weapon that was the conversation was around, do we give the Stinger missile do we let the Stinger missile into the hands of those that we can't control? We ultimately decided to do it. And those of us that were and the Stinger missile was a brilliant weapon. It's a handheld, very small, heat-seeking ground-to-air missile.
Yeah,
and
Stinger.
The Stinger.
I actually remember
very
that
intelligent
weapon from Call of Duty. I think it was the game that I used to play 10 years ago or so. That used to be a ground-to-air rocket launcher that
Correct.
could seek the plane and take it down.
Correct. So you could put this in the hands of people all throughout the whole mountain range of the battle, and without very expensive, troops and everything else that usually would go along with this, and we changed the course of the war because we started taking down their MiGs.
Wow, that is crazy. That's how it happened.
But we were pretty convinced that they would end up on the black market, and they would take down a commercial 747, and all of us would have blood on our hands.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So we did a bunch of things to try to make sure that didn't happen.
As in, you had to have people working within them, making sure they weren't trying.
We tried to track them, and we tried to train them, and you had to know. But we were there's always leakages. You can't trust the system. There's always going to be a breakdown.
Totally.
We were convinced that the risk of losing civilians, innocent civilians in a 747, was worth the arming to take down. I mean, we had to make that gamble.
Totally, yeah.
Right, and to come to terms with that as a decision-making point. Yeah. It ended up not happening. What happened in a bizarre twist of history was we trained Osama bin Laden in our training camps. He used the plane as the weapon in 9/11. Yeah. Not shooting down a plane, he used the plane. The plane became the weapon, not the vehicle.
And we weren't thinking about that, not at all. Wow.
So for those of us that were in the beginning game, when 9/11 happened, it was the most upside down moment.
Yeah.
Because we all saw in a flash exactly what had happened. We trained them, we armed them, I'm getting. This is a cul-de-sac.
I love this cul-de-sac.
This is a
We gotta
cul-de-sac.
stay here, and
This
then
is
we're gonna
total.
go
This
to
is a total cul-de-sac to
yeah,
what we're
of
supposed
your
to be
life,
talking about.
But of your life, it's so interesting, and of history.
So
it's really important.
Anyway, the lesson here is that you can think things out, and you can try to put in place protections and steps to put boundaries around what you're trying to do. But history has a way, and humanity in the course of events have a way of just the unexpected happens, and that process to me was the 9/11 was so unexpected.
That was
a twist.
That was about 20 years or so that led up to that 9/11 moment.
Yeah, so let's say in 85, Osama bin Laden started showing up in about 1985, right?
Yeah, so about 16 years.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah, you're right, that twist of events and what happened. This is crazy. Most people would never view it this way, but the creativity that was there of figuring out to use the plane.
Correct. So anyway, so in the Senate, so I'm in the Senate, and this gets back to more why is this an important time to be alive and what's happening.
And it was all through the government, right? This
it's
was
all government work.
And what department of the government is
I was in the
work?
Senate, so the Senate has considerable foreign affairs power because of the Constitution. It has ceded a lot of that power to the executive branch.
And then
particularly
it makes
since Vietnam,
in military decision.
the Senate is supposed to have the say whether we go to war or not. But we're engaged in quote unquote war all the time now. We just never declare it. So there's a breakdown in the checks and balances that the Constitution intended, and that's a whole other conversation about the War Powers Act and all that.
Foreign policy still exists today, from like observing areas of the world that are trying to have radical, authoritarian military, creating lots of power overthrows and all this stuff, and just being able to prevent innocent civilians across the world from death and from harm is constantly happening, although it's not in a state of war. Okay.
So at the same time that we're launching this bleeder strategy, right? Bleed the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Get the Cold War to stop. Where Al Gore is ramping up the first hearings in the Senate on climate change, which I helped staff. And
awesome.
So here's this data set.
Wow.
About carbon and temperature, and we're just at the big. We're about 4 or 5 years into. Maybe 8 years, the science are beginning to get enough data going. We kind of have this correlation of greenhouse gases and this trend that says that looks pretty interesting. The data matches pretty much to the Industrial Revolution and the burning of fossil fuels to a heating of the planet that doesn't correlate with natural cycles, right? That there's an increase that the natural cycles it's beyond the natural cycle. So this looks to be human driven.
At the same time that the bleeding's going on of the Soviet Union.
I was doing both at the same time, right? So I'm asking the scientists, the scientific community, what do you need to start to address the climate crisis? And they say we have no budget because all of the budget is driven by Cold War driven priorities. Yeah. Nuclear, space weapons, right? Reagan and Star Wars, if you remember his Star Wars thing. And so the big chunks of budget that were needed, that the scientists would need to start to actually dig into climate because it was new science, and so the best minds and the best scientific budgets were all going to the Cold War. So it was like, well, we have to stop the Cold War to free up the resources and the thinking to start to address what, to me, it became really clear, it's not the human-to-human conflict about whether my system and your system, whether free market versus communism is better. That ceased to become the real threat to humanity. When the climate scenario emerged, to me it was like, well, it's whether we even have a livable planet to begin with.
Yeah, that's a huge consciousness shifting moment.
Becomes the question to address.
Yeah.
But now we have to get rid of this first one.
Yeah.
in order to get to the second
one. Yeah. Yeah, having both those things happen simultaneously, it kind of puts. It's so funny because it put the war for nationalism into a what could potentially put the war for nationalism on the back burner. Oh, well, probably having a planet where our kids can even live on that planet. And so that, interestingly enough, ended up kind of being like, wow. So now we have the war on two fronts of becoming a sustainable planet, but also at the same time trying to provide as much democracy across the planet as possible. Okay, so have we packed away that called the war cul-de-sac?
Yes.
And now we can move on?
We can move on. Let's move on.
So let's
Cold War ended, right? It ended suddenly.
Because we're taking down 1 MiG a week.
Roughly.
And okay, so we're slowly bled that out, the fighters, planes.
There's a number of reasons why this collapsed. This helped.
Helped collapse it.
Yep.
Okay, so then it collapses, and in '91, and then there's this. When did Al Gore do the first?
1986, I believe, was 1985, 1986 was the
86,
first.
Okay.
First real kind of he brought it into the national consciousness because he was working with a scientist he'd been working with a scientist that was a mentor of his.
Great.
So, and he did a really good job of helping bring it up.
Yes.
Right around mid-'80s,
Okay.
right?
So then, the Soviet problem takes, it deregulates a bit.
Then we had an environmental crisis.
Environmental crisis gets more attention in the 90s.
Starts to, right? There was a period of increasing awareness that we as a species at a global level have to start to work together.
Correct.
That manifested itself in the 1992 Earth Summit, the first Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro.
Cool.
It was the largest gathering of countries and heads of state ever that said, okay, we all live on the same planet.
Yep.
We need to start to work together to address at planetary scale the ecosystem.
Yep.
That was the first and biggest. So it was important because of that first step.
The Earth Summit still goes on today, every year?
Every 20 or so, but there's lots and lots of initiatives moving forward now.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
And there's the climate ones in Paris. I mean, typically we react to a crisis when the crisis is full blown, and one of the reasons we're not reacting to climate is because it's playing out in such slow motion from our perception of time that it's hard for us to grasp the crisis because it's playing itself out very, very slowly, right? But things that happen suddenly, we're much better equipped to address. So in the late 90s, there was something called acid rain begin to happen. And this was basically the smokestacks. If you lived in the Northeast, you knew all about this. So the coal-burning power plants in the Midwest were emitting basically unfiltered nitrous oxide and NOx and SOx, it was called, two major pollutants. They would go up, they would hit the lower level atmosphere, and they would move across the United States, and the airstream would move them to New England and Canada, and they were basically dumping these two chemicals and coal soot into New England and Canada, and it was literally rain, which was acidic, and it was killing off the lakes and the trees and the fish at pretty wide scale. So all of a sudden there was this crisis, right? What do we do? And people were getting, as they do, upset and demanding action. So I was still in the Senate, and we were looking for solutions, and we came up with an untried process called cap and trade.
What year was this?
88, 89, 89, 90? 88, 89, 90, roughly. Cap and trade, if you look at it, looks like tokenomics.
Yeah.
And it looks like very similar to a cryptocurrency, and it looks very similar to what we're seeing some of the models we're now seeing in blockchain. The notion was to create a marketplace where you use market incentives to drive a certain kind of action.
Yep.
And so we set up, and we didn't know it was going to work. It was a total, it was an experiment. It ended up working quite well. It solved the acid rain problem, and probably 10 years quicker than we thought, at much less cost than we thought.
There were only a certain amount of pollution credits that the energy companies got.
So there was an issue of basically a certain number of credits. Those credits represented the right to pollute NOx and SOx into the atmosphere. Though over time, those credits would start to be removed. There would be less and less of them. Mm-hmm. So the first year there'd be, I can't remember the exact number, let's say there'd be 1 million credits. Then the next year there'd be 900,000, 800,000, 700,000.
And if you wanted to keep polluting,
you had to have the credits
from
in
other
order
people
to give you the right to pollute.
And so it basically pushed people to sustainable sources of energy.
So it drove, the government made a decision. We're going to create a marketplace, but we're not going to determine how you get there. We're not going to choose technology winners.
Yeah.
We're not going to dictate the way that you do it. We're going to let the marketplace and human ingenuity and capitalism at its best, which is there's some boundaries, right, that protect the commons, which is what this was. Hey, we're doing this to protect and value the commons, the air we breathe, and the fish and the trees, and we determine that those have value by doing this. And it worked quite well. So now, and I held on to that notion going, okay, it worked here.
Yeah.
And the farther along we got ever since then, for the last 25 years, we have been really unable to address the greater climate problem, right? Because we haven't been able to, the market doesn't have the boundaries and the incentives yet within which to actually address and turn the problem into profit. So as blockchain starts to emerge, I looked at it for a couple of years and it's like, okay, it's interesting. Then I started seeing the speculation and go, okay, it's interesting, you can make some profit. But it was when I started to really look at blockchain as through the lens of, can it solve what we have not been able to solve, which is how to value and incentivize the commons, that I got so excited. So that brings us to today.
I love it. Wait, let's, and we'll get to the Bureau right now. We'll get there. I want to stay on, I want to stay here for a second. So this is probably one of the coolest ways that my mind has recently been expanded, thanks to you, is that cap and trade was actually a very interesting way that the government did not dictate the ingenuity, but they said that, hey, we do need a transition over time, so we're going to make a market, we're going to create a system kind of like tokenomics is, and that cap and trade slowly led companies away from the crazy environmental pollution that was going on in the Northeast and in Canada. That sounds horrible, and it led them slowly over time towards being like, we can't afford all these crazy credits that we need for pollution, so let's make the transition to alternative energy. And then that was kind of the so it went from Gore to the cap and trade to alternative energy, and
cap and trade is a Republican concept. It was Republican promoted. It was Republican bill. It was Republican crafted, and it was driven by the Republican arguments of don't fetter human creativity.
Yeah.
Create some rules and a marketplace. Don't use regulation. Yeah. Stimulate ingenuity.
Yeah.
And it was all Republicans that moved this forward.
That's so interesting, yeah. I wonder what policies, if we implemented that exact, there's some similar sort of mentality and systems thinking to today, what would happen to certain areas of the world that we need to work on and improve with this sort of mentality of like a cap and trade, don't hinder ingenuity, but create a market like that. That's so interesting that it was all like Republican driven. Wow.
At the time, the Democrats said, fine them, right? Just come in and set up fines and regulate that you have to cease those emissions, and if you don't, we'll fine you.
Yeah.
Right? That was their.
Wow.
That was the heavy hand of regulation fine, right?
Yeah.
There's no carrot; it's just stick, right?
Yeah.
And so it was it was a Republican response to come up with
the carrot,
the market.
Right? Yeah, the market. So that was so interesting.
And profit.
Yeah, the carrot became a cap and trade hanging over their heads, and they were like, okay, this is how we have to transition. Okay, so interesting. Where that can be applied today to make the world better, I don't know, and I really want to figure that out, hanging that carrot and seeing how people transition. Okay, so how about maybe like the education sector, the healthcare sector?
Right.
Okay, so now as you see, you're initially seeing the technology of blockchain, decentralization, a decentralized digital ledger. As you're seeing this come into the world and tokenomics come into the world, you make that link and you're like, I now feel more optimistic about empowering all people to be a part of building the future.
The optimism is it comes from technology. The digitization empowers people. Digitization broadly, right? So the move from analog to digital, and the move from what came before to analog. Each of those steps gives more information quicker to more people, and going digital has basically been just a supernova. The blockchain creates simultaneously a way for everybody to see data, whatever that data is, to trust the authenticity of that data, and once you can see it and you can trust it, you have the underpinnings of market. Now you can lay on top of that governance that is attached to the trust. And with those three things, what you require governments to do, you no longer require the government to do. And governments around the world have been exceedingly slow in their capacity to address the tragedy of the commons. So this tool that is now empowering individuals and groups of individuals to create marketplaces without the government having to set up a rule. The cap and trade required the government to come in and establish a system within which the economy would play, right? How that system functioned is very similar to what happens within a blockchain and a tokenomic structure. But you needed the government to set the rules up. Now we don't need the government. We can create marketplaces to address the commons without waiting for the political census, political consensus to be there, because we're not getting it, or it's not coming fast enough, in my view, given the rate at which the world is changing around climate. So it's that fundamental shift, right, of empowering and creating a marketplace without a government setting up the rules. To me, that was now we can do this, right? And it's not about lobbying governments and right, we still do that work, but we can now move forward and start to execute and create these marketplaces, and we can give carbon value, and we can give some of these other things that we've been known as externalities, putting into the environment without a cost, and then society has to somehow figure out how to pay for that externality. We can turn around and say that externality now is a commodity that we can put value upon, and now we can address it.
So, okay, we're observing all these different markets that are proliferating, and now we can leverage technologies like blockchain and cryptocurrencies to address some of the biggest issues that are going on in those markets and in those sectors by creating some sort of incentivization strategies for people, maybe leveraging tokenomics like a cap and trade system in those different markets.
Correct.
Yeah, that's cool.
Correct.
Yeah, that's really exciting how it can actually be applied to I would have the history that that initially cap and trade was a big role in tapering us away from fossil fuels to alternative sources of energy. That puzzle that happened, you said like 86 till like mid 90s, was that kind of like that 10-year window?
Yeah, something there.
Okay.
Late.
That I would not have related to 2018 and tokenomics and blockchain in the way that we can augment these markets through similar kind of cap and trade process to foster creativity. I would have never made that connection until you brought it into my life. And I hope that that really resonates with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Hey, listen, we're all standing upon the shoulders of giants that have come
Absolutely.
before us. And
Absolutely.
and these ideas are iterations of ideas that have been moving through our species for often for long periods of time. It's timing, and we needed enough people to have enough bandwidth and connectivity and enough computing power distributed enough to even think about having distributed governance and distributed markets, right? I mean, it's happening when it needs to, right? This evolution. So, but the fact that's why I'm so excited now is that this set of tools, it can help us break free of this resistance that has been that I think a lot of us are feeling, that the governments are not moving to govern the world within which we're evolving fast enough, and so there's a tension. Right? And so blockchain allows us to release that tension in a productive way to actually execute.
I like that. Blockchain's relieving that tension for us. So why don't you give us a couple of the key areas that you're thinking this is most applicable in, and then would you say this is what you're doing as the Chief Strategic Officer at the Bureau?
Yeah, so let me tell you, so how I'm manifesting this now is I'm really excited to be working with it's a great team, and we're building something called the Bureau. It's about 9 months old. It's moving very, very quickly, but we saw an opportunity we saw that blockchain can be used for many, to address many problems in the world. And to create many different marketplaces. And so we said, so what can we do to add value? How can we help move this forward? And so what we came up with is, well, let's build a platform that is solely focused on helping other entrepreneurs and other projects and other companies that use blockchain for the greater good or impact or addressing climate, whatever term you want to use, but that are using blockchain to address intractable problems that our species faces. Let's build a platform that helps those projects go from idea to execution much quicker.
Yep.
Let's accelerate that process. So we've built, the Bureau is 100% focused on helping those projects go from idea to getting out in the market. So we have an engineering team that people can leverage. We have a marketing team that people can leverage, a tokenomics team that people can leverage. A business team that people can leverage, and then we'll be adding on to that later on a fund that we're going to be raising, and then we'll be able to add significant amounts of at-risk capital to get those projects moving.
Are you thinking about
so
this
it's about volume?
Are you thinking about it as both as a consultancy then, and also as an incubator to actually foster the cohorts?
And as an investor and a partner.
Yeah, correct. So then you would do something similar to the seed investment for equity in their token or in whatever it is, and then.
Great. Well, we'll help the founders form a team. We're going to do a whole bunch of steps. If needed, we'll help the founders form the team. Leverage our technology and development team so that their technology moves faster, so that so they don't have to go and hire everybody all at once. They can leverage what we have to get that idea moving quicker, get out into the market by leveraging our marketing team, get out in the market, and so they can grow organically, but much quicker because you're leveraging our resources to be that springboard.
And the Bureau is kind of what we were talking about as we were finishing off the cap and trade conversation, moving into how that can be applied in tokenomics. The Bureau is kind of the manifestation of how do we address all these different markets potentially with tokenomics.
Right.
Okay, so what are some of the organizations that are already using the consultancy of the Bureau, if we can talk about them?
Well, we haven't come out publicly with a lot of them, but I'll tell you some of the areas. So the power sector, the electricity sector in particular, is one where blockchain, the blockchain can bring significant improvements. I mean, we have an electrical grid that really, it's a marvel of human ingenuity. When you look at the complexity and the scale at which we move electrons around, it's really quite stunning.
It's insane. We have a close friend, her name's Miriam, she's a patron, and she totally teaches us about the way that energy is moved and bought and sold, and it is crazy. It supplies power for humanity.
And we demand and expect 99.999% uptime.
100%. If you flick on the switch,
right,
or if you open the faucet and the water's not coming out or the electricity's not coming in, you're freaking out because you really expect it. And hopefully, like California, recently heard this as well, California has much cleaner energy than New York does.
Correct. The electrical grid, the liquid fuel system is that whole infrastructure that's different, right? But the electron grid, the electrical grid, it's really quite a marvel. But it's 19th, early 20th century architecture, right? And we've leaped, and what we need now is not what we built then.
Let's hear your solution, what you're working on.
Well, it's really, it looks much like the internet, really. It's the internet functions because it itself is decentralized to a great degree. If we had, the internet would not function with so many singular points of intelligence being so concentrated, and then everybody having to figure out a way to connect to those singular points of intelligence. It's distributed, right? It's distributed it's the distributed model, which is, and the blockchain is another take on that same model. And it mirrors nature and the way that nature operates, which it's a very highly distributed, complex, interwoven system. It's not a centralized command and control system.
Totally. When one of the trees has an excess of carbon that it's been sequestering, and it has a root system underground, there's a whole conversation that's going on between the smaller trees and the larger trees and the mycelium.
Oh, I'm glad you're up on the awakening to what has been happening, right? Because science is finally catching up that it is not survival of the fittest that is the rule. It is a highly cooperative, intelligent system.
Yeah.
And we've had this notion of it's survival of the fittest, that everyone's competing out there.
Yeah.
That in a forest or an ecosystem is one of competition. Well, it's totally different. It is complete cooperation and a network, and it's a distributed, intelligent network. So the electrical grid will go the same way that the internet went. To do that, it will be so that means that power is produced locally and consumed as locally to its production as you possibly can get, and it will have multiple types of production, and the web interlinking those will be much more like the mycelium and the mushroom underneath the soil than it will be this command control power plant with big lines going across.
Yep. Oh, that sounds so great.
But the blockchain is required now to create the marketplaces that allows these microgrids to flourish within themselves.
Yeah.
For intelligence and billing and
exciting.
ownership. It's the ownership structure.
Yeah.
You have to break the ownership structure down.
Right now, a lot of what goes on is this storage of energy, and then the distribution and selling that stored energy to other energy companies that then distribute it to to the people that are in their homes using it. That's our 15-minute timer. Thank you, Ron. And we go.
John, did you attend the Acting in Time on Energy Policy Consortium at Harvard about 10 years ago?
I did not.
Okay. Okay, never mind. Back to the show. I just videotaped it, and you were talking about cap and trade, and they were discussing all these things 10 years ago back in at that.
Yeah.
Oh,
thank
sweet.
you, though.
Ron,
Yeah,
that's cool.
yeah, John Holdren was there,
That's
John
cool.
Deutsch, Woolsey, a whole bunch of even prominent players asking these difficult questions.
I think I remember seeing that video on your website that you
Yeah.
had that, as one of the things that you did. Okay.
Sorry.
So, no. That's,
Sorry to bother you.
That's a good segue. Because I think we'll talk about that afterward. Okay. So check this out. So rather than having it be this, the initial source of energy, will then store it and then sell it and distribute it to a local organization that will then distribute it further to the homes and all that stuff. Now we're adding more of that, like root network, the nature network, to potentially get all of the sources of energy in a sustainable way as close to the location that it's being distributed to as possible, in a way that's a digital ledger that's decentralized, very easy to see and tap into. And that's kind of one of the first big projects that is being worked on at the Bureau.
We're working on some energy projects for sure.
Yeah.
I'll give you some other really exciting use cases. I'm gonna stack a few other nonlinear technologies like the blockchain on top of this to make it even more interesting. So if you think about one of the ways that we can address the climate issue is by planting. Trees are one of the most brilliant natural creations out there, right? They produce the air we breathe, and they take carbon out, and they create shade, and they create water. And I mean, the utility of a tree for life itself is pretty high up, right? I mean, there's very few other things.
Very high
They're
utility.
very, very high utility of a tree.
And I do want to make sure that we all know that trees are 30%-ish of the oxygen. We get about 70% from plankton.
Thank you. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
70% from plankton.
From plankton from the ocean, yeah. It's nuts to.
Thank you, plankton.
Thank you, plankton. Yeah, no kidding.
Right?
Yeah. Continue with trees. High utility. We don't get shade from plankton. They don't give us fruit. Plankton don't give us apples. Yeah.
We don't have enough trees, and we've been cutting down trees for industrial uses and as a resource. If we planted more trees, it's good. There's very few who would say that planting a lot more trees is not a good thing. The way in which we've been planting trees, however, it's not particularly cost effective, because you usually have to take a human, and you take humans out, and you have to grow them, and then you give humans little seedlings, and the humans go out and they have to plant them. Well, there's a way now to use robotics and artificial intelligence and big data and the blockchain, wrap it all into one, and basically address tree planting at a whole different scale and a whole different cost structure.
I'm just imagining this massive combine that goes and plants trees and like robotically moves across the field and just plants hella trees.
But it's even more efficient than that. It's drones, and pretty good, decent drones. And the drones have seedlings that are in a pod. So it has a little bit of soil, and the roots are sitting in a pod.
Yeah.
The drone, where you're going to plant has all been mapped out by soil and water and all that, so you know what you're working with. You're controlling it robotically. The ownership of the project is through the blockchain, so that it can be fractionalized, so that you're not requiring some big government to pay the cost up front. You're distributing that cost out. And then the monitoring, et cetera, and the governance about what happens to the tree over their lifetime. The blockchain is taking care of the financing and the governance and the consensus components to this. The robotics are now taking care of the delivery of what you're doing. And basically the drone flies overhead and shoots these trees, and they shoot them with enough velocity that they go into the soil and the capsule breaks open. And so now you don't have a human walking, going bump, bump, bump. You basically have a drone that's shooting trees so fast as it's flying over. It's like a machine gun with trees going down, right? Little seedlings. That you can, for $10 million, I want to make sure I get this somewhat right, but $10 million it allows you to plant, I think, 1 billion trees. Mm-hmm. Now that's a 100x cost reduction.
Oh, sweet! That's huge.
From
yeah, that's a major cost reduction.
So we can so now you can think about, this is why I get excited, because if you just linearly look at the numbers of where we are with climate change and how we used to using older techniques to address the problem, that linear run of cost versus time, it didn't make sense. But these non-linear leaps of these technologies like robotics and artificial intelligence and blockchain with its piece, we have the capacity to terraform, right?
Yeah.
In a way that is cost effective and maybe just in time to stave off that temperature curve so that we can bring it back down and keep a livable planet.
Yep, that was the full circle all the way back to the beginning with what we were discussing and how it was going up and up and up, and then now how the new technologies that we're now seeing are going to help us plateau and then go back down, and it's an increase in creativity and innovation and technology, and a decrease in pollution, and a decrease in an increase in democratization of the future, and and leaving a livable world for our kids. Okay, before we run out of time, let's ask you a couple quick simulation questions. You touched on this as we were going through it, our conversation, which was the notion of this individual tribalism, individualism and tribalism versus the complete collective cohesion that we see in nature in these underground networks of communication as well as above ground networks of communication, less of the Darwinian sort of the genetic fitness winning versus the collective idea, the collective collaboration idea. So this question we ask on the show a lot is, what do we do moving forward in terms of globalization, in terms of wealth inequality? Ronnie, there's something playing in the back. I don't know what it is. There's just something playing in the back. I don't know what it is. But what do we do moving forward in terms of globalization, wealth inequality? How do we work together across these borders, and how do we address the increase in wealth inequality that's currently occurring, even though the bottom is still coming up? How do we bring them up faster so that way we can have less of a gap where it feels like it's either the rich or the poor?
This is going to sound awfully simplistic, but people look to government for leadership and expect our governments to be ahead, to be addressing these issues, and they try to use government. And when you expect government to lead, then you get frustrated when it doesn't, and you get so there's and then you get disempowered, and you say, well, government's not doing this, so what can we do? I think that there's a misnomer here about and that expectation. Government was established within human society to adjudicate conflict, to set some rules so that we could live harmoniously together. It wasn't, and then to eventually to help protect us from external threats. But it wasn't set up to lead. It's not it wasn't a leadership mechanism. It was a conflict resolution mechanism. So the problems that you're all talking that you've raised, and there's a number of them, right? Waiting for governments or looking at and putting your energy around getting the government to do something, to me is that energy is better spent actually saying, how can I help solve the problem? What can I do to create a marketplace? What product can I create? How can I use and work with others to actually go after this and not wait for government to solve it?
Private sector leadership and creativity, innovation.
Whatever, it doesn't have to be private sector. It's just in personal responsibility and act on it, and not say that this is, I'm going to wait for somebody else.
Yeah. Okay, so let's run you through. Do you think we're alone in the cosmos?
No.
Do you think there are advanced civilizations roaming the cosmos?
I don't know, but I was really intrigued and heartened to see there was a scientific paper that came out 2 or 3 weeks ago about octopuses. And octopus DNA is so different from any other DNA that is on the planet, and it just, and according to this research, it just appeared quite suddenly, like there was no natural evolution of that DNA strand. That is unlike every other species. It just appeared quickly in the biosphere.
They're not as old as sharks. Sharks are like 400 million years old.
It was 150 million years ago or so that the octopus all of a sudden were like, boom, here's a whole different DNA structure. And so the notion that their eggs, here's one, the theory being floated in this paper was that their octopus eggs were basically on some celestial body, and because they're in space, they're basically cryogenically frozen, and then hit the planet, warmed up, and here they were. So they came from someplace else. They're aliens.
So we can't eat them.
I made a decision a long time ago, and I didn't know why that I wouldn't eat octopus, right? But that was like, of course, because they are unlike any other species for a whole bunch of reasons. And their DNA is totally different. So that was another mark of course.
The shit you learn on simulation. I love it. Interesting.
Maybe it was 250 million years ago. I might be off by 100 million, but there was a sudden, all of a sudden this DNA is here, and it had no predecessor.
Yeah, whenever I'm asked about the what animal would you choose to be question, I answer two. I answer both eagle, I want to fly, and I also answer octopus or squid because I want to be down there and be the massive ones that are just observing in the abyss.
So maybe you came from a different planet.
I definitely came from a different planet. So did Ron. He's also an alien.
We don't talk about that, please. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so do you think we're in a computer simulation?
No.
Why?
I don't want to believe that.
Do you think that a civilization can become sufficiently advanced enough to make a simulation?
I love The Matrix. It's a great... it is so creative. That story is so creative.
Yeah. It's like one of the most important stories that's ever been told.
I don't want to believe it. However, each of us is basically in our own simulation, whether it is controlled by a nefarious other intelligence.
Okay, and how about our last question? What do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
Love.
Tell us why.
It is the reason for being, and when love turns the entire universe into something that is amazing. It turns everything into something that's amazing.
I wonder if love is the energy that these different civilizations that spring up as evolution goes on these rocks orbiting stars, that is love that force that they need to uncover, embody, and develop in order to get past these Fermi filters, these things that stop civilizations from advancing.
Are you following the scientific there's studies now about the pituitary gland and DMT. And DMT just may be the common communicating element between all life.
Yum.
It's a fascinating that opening that door is.
Yeah. Thanks for opening the door at the end of the show. That's such a good door to open. Yeah. So we are familiar with 5-MeO-DMT. We are familiar with the oneness that it brings, that the transcendence of the ego that it brings, the oneness, and you said the commonality within just a quick cliff notes explain commonality, DMT, pituitary gland, all beings. Can you cliff notes that for us?
Well, I'm just looking at it. It is the human species seems to regard itself as being distinct from. It has a peculiar. We have a peculiar way of being distinct from nature. We think that we're separate from it.
Yes.
And rise above it and have dominion over. Which is probably not the case.
Hubristic.
We're a part of all this. And
anthropocentric.
And DMT. If you've participated in ceremonies and had experiences, you have a sense of being a part of the universe, not being distinct from. And DMT is is perhaps the language within which that transfers.
It's the language. Ooh, I like that. Oh, we are very excited that you brought that up at the end of the show. And hopefully we can bring that language to more people. And I think that as that happens, that we're gonna build a better collective world moving forward. John, this has been a fucking pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is really fun.
It's super fun.
Wish we could do this every day.
We'll definitely have to have more of these powerful conversations unpacking the craziness of what happened in the 80s with the Soviet Union, shooting down these MiGs with these strikers, and then and also what happened with cap and trade, and how we were in an environmental crisis, and how we were able to bring that sort of a marketplace to innovation, and then how now tokenomics and what you're working on with the Bureau is aiming to do with the electrical grid and so many other things is super, super exciting, and I'm really pumped to help connect a lot of people from our network in, for you to open up what you're up to, for our network to also be a part of. Like, this is so exciting. And what about this 5-MeO? What about this DMT and the language of the universe? Thank you everyone for tuning in. Thanks John for being our guest. We greatly appreciate it. If you guys found something useful from today's show, make sure to go create with it. That's number one. That's the most important thing. Don't just consume the content, go create with it. Write about it, blog about it, video blog about it, talk to other people about it, start a company with it, do things like that. Subscribe, join the family. Join us by commenting below with your thoughts. We'll feature you on our Instagram and our Twitter. Also, join us on Patreon. We need to make this place sustainable. We need to make these conversations sustainable. We need to grow this out to be a creative incubator. So we want to bring other YouTube talent in, let them use the production equipment, grow it out, house them, feed them, etc. We want to grow it out. So let's do it together. Join us on Patreon. Thanks to Ron Vargas, our producing partner. Thanks to John. We greatly appreciate you for tuning in, and much love. Peace.